let's start by looking at priesthood. What do priests do? Well, I think my popular impression of what priests did came down to priests are like church butchers. You know, they spend all day doing nothing but sacrificing animals. Priests do a number of things. They teach. They teach the Torah. All right? Teaching is a priestly activity. When Jesus is 12 years old, where is he when his parents catch up to him? He's in the temple asking questions of the priests and astounding them with his own answers. How often is Jesus preaching at the temple during the last week of his life, and even earlier when he's in Jerusalem? Priests intercede. They represent God to the people, and they represent the people to God. And the sacrifices are means of that intercession. A really nice picture of this is in Numbers chapter 8. God, through Samuel, says, all right, let the Levites come forward. First, we all get together at the tabernacle, all 12 tribes, so they all assemble. And then he says, let the Levites come forward. And the Levites come forward from the body of the 12 tribes. And he says, I'm going to take the Levites in exchange for the firstborn Hebrews that I spared back in Egypt. And the Levites will be mine. You might consider that a living sacrifice. The Levites are a living sacrifice, right? They are, they belong to the Lord, and the other 11 tribes get land as an inheritance, but the Levites' inheritance is the Lord. Whether you think that's a good or bad deal says something about your spiritual state. So the Levites do sacrifices, but they already embody sacrifice. They are a sacrifice. And you know, if you've taken an economics course, they really are a sacrifice. They're expensive. It's expensive to have one of the 12 tribes be dedicated to this kind of work. They are, in a sense, supported by those other 11 tribes, by their sacrifices. And so they're a burden on the whole nation. They are a sacrifice, a living sacrifice. But the service they provide is indispensable. So they're not just a burden, they're an incredible blessing. Another part of their job description is to discern and conserve and restore Israel's holiness. What is Israel's holiness? Well, we'll look at that later on, but let's consider it for now Israel's difference and Israel's usefulness. All right? Israel is useful to God because Israel is different. It's not just like another nation. God lays down rules, Torah rules, to make Israel different and keep Israel different, to make it and keep it holy. When those rules are broken, the priests intercede to restore its holiness. These rules also draw distinctions and arrange Israel in a structure that sets its mind on God and on God's difference. So, for instance, you can't go to the tabernacle if you touch dead flesh for a living, if you're an undertaker. You can't be in God's presence if you're hemorrhaging or if you have bodily emissions of various kinds. They get the point across that God is different, and that only under particular conditions are we presentable. And if I have a skin disease, or I'm in a condition that rules me out from attending the the tabernacle or the temple, the priests make that call. Either I'm unclean, or if I show myself, I can be certified as clean and eligible. So priests are like Israel's public health authorities, quarantining uncleanness and also quarantining sin. And again, those are two distinct things. To be an undertaker is not to be a sinner. It is, however, to be in an occupation that keeps you from entering the holy place. If you want to summarize those functions in one role, think worship leader. The priests are Israel's worship leaders. Our worship leader is Tommy Walker. Some of you might have heard or sung some of his songs in church. We sing a few of them in chapel. He was at a music convention where there was a trade show where everybody's selling all their stuff, and he went and visited a friend of his who makes guitars. And he said, "Oh, Tommy, I want to show you something." So he brings out this gorgeous electric guitar with the kind of pearled surface of gold and yeah, pearlish white intermixed. I don't know how you do that with fiberglass, but they do. And streaks of blue and crimson. And as Tommy's admiring it, he says, "It's actually yours. I want you to have it. I made it for you." And Tommy's like, "Why?" And he said, "Well, these are the colors of the Levitical priests. And when you're up front in church, you're our worship leader. You're our priest going before God for us." It's like, yeah, he gets it. He gets it. So when you think of the priesthood, think of Tommy with his electric guitar, or think of Joel Patterson, or think of those who are just up front representing in both directions. However, it doesn't work. In fact, it can't work. Even the most central rites, blood sacrifices, sin offerings, they don't work. At least, they don't atone for sin. Isaiah 1, verse 10. "Hear the word of the Lord, you chieftains of Sodom." Ouch. I think that's maybe a bad thing. "Give ear to our God's instruction, you folk of Gomorrah. What need have I of all your sacrifices, says Yahweh? I'm sated with burnt offerings of rams and suet of fatlings and blood of bulls, and I have no delight in lambs and he-goats. That you come to appear before me? Who asked that of you?" Well, wasn't it you, Lord? "Trample my courts no more. Bringing oblations is futile. Incense is offensive to me. New moon and Sabbath, proclaiming of solemnities, assemblies with iniquity. I cannot abide. Your new moons and fixed seasons filled me with loathing. They have become a burden to me. I cannot endure them. And when you lift up your hands, I will turn my eyes away from you. Though you pray at length, I will not listen. Your hands are stained with crime. Wash yourselves clean. Put your evil things away from my sight. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Devote yourselves to justice. Aid the wronged. Uphold the rights of the orphan. Defend the cause of the widow. Come, let us reason together." What's the point of the narrative here? Well, notice the kind of atonement theology that isn't here. Notice that God doesn't say, "I'm disgusted with what you do. I'm disgusted with your sins, but you're following my rules. You're giving sin offerings accordingly, and so we're okay." Notice that's not what the prophet says. You're doing the offerings, but the offerings aren't what God is after. It's not working in Isaiah 1. In fact, it's already not working even as Moses is preaching to his people before they enter the promised land. He says, "I know your hearts are set on wandering. I know you're not going to listen to these rules." when the prophets foretell disaster on Israel, it's in spite of the offerings, right? It's in spite of the priests doing the letter of the law. And moreover, when God restores Israel, when God brings them back, when God brings them to health and revives them, it's in a place where there's no temple, no tabernacle, no sacrifices. It's in Babylon. It's in exile. So apparently, God can restore without them, and the sacrifices themselves aren't preserving Israel from that kind of disaster. Hebrews chapter 10 puts it as bluntly as anywhere. It's impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. So what's going on? What's up? How does God require something that doesn't work? Well, what's it for? Hebrews, which is a rather radical interpretation of the priesthood, says they're just a reminder of sins year after year. They're a reminder. They keep sin in the minds of Israel. I'm going to pose this kind of dilemma with each office. Each office, as it's set up in Israel, seems to be incomplete or contradictory, or simply just radically inadequate to what it's for. But see, Hebrews doesn't just have a pessimistic take on Israel's traditions. Hebrews doesn't just say, wow, that's frustrating. We're required to do things that don't work. Hebrews is arguing a greater argument. The blood of bulls and goats was a reminder of sin, but it paved the way for a new kind of priest in Jesus of Nazareth, right? So the fact that these sacrifices don't work only indicates that the priest who has to act is going to be a different kind of priest.